And here we are again. It almost seems like this was done on purpose because I had just uploaded my New York Times fake news video talking about an article that the New York Times published about Portugal last year, where they basically just pushed for the usual Portuguese government propaganda, where they claim that they ended austerity, when in fact they are pushing for the highest austerity that this country has ever seen. There's just no comparison, especially outside of a financial adjustment program, just like the one we had between 2011 and 2015. So this time it's the Financial Times. And as far as I'm concerned, the Financial Times did an even worse job than the New York Times, because the New York Times didn't provide any data. They just claimed that the austerity is over, just like the Portuguese government, but they provided no information, no financial or economic data about the country, or at least nothing concrete. If you wanted to know about it, you would need to look for it, because the New York Times article did not provide anything. The Financial Times, however, does this. They provide the data that clearly shows that Portugal is, in fact, applying the highest austerity ever, while at the same time they are praising the Portuguese government for ending austerity, and that this is a path that perhaps other European countries need to follow, as if this is a grand thing, something that this government did that no one else did before, and other countries need to follow what this amazing socialist government did in Portugal. And actually they go as far as saying that the current Portuguese government is a coalition between the moderate left and the far left, which is hilarious, because clearly the Financial Times does not know what they're talking about. The Socialist Party is not the moderate left. They are the left, period. They have nothing moderate about it. They are closer to the far left than to the moderate side of the left. The only moderate party that we have on the left is, or are, the Social Democrats. And even they are also very keen on applying socialism in Portugal without issues. They are just slower than the socialists themselves. But anyway, let's go through some of the things that this propaganda article claims. For example, they talk about, in the title itself, they say Portugal, a European path out of austerity? It's a question. They pose this question as if it even made sense. Because in the article itself, they will explain that Portugal is reducing, for example, the deficit to almost zero. And how does this happen for the Financial Times? It's probably magic, because for them, this is not austerity. Applying the highest cuts ever to the public sectors is not austerity. They also say the economy has rebounded since the center-left government reversed post-crisis budget cuts. Center-left. This is not center-left. These are the socialists. They are left and very close to the far left. In fact, they did the coalition with the far left, as I explained in previous videos as well. So they also say Europe is still struggling to find a label for the new brand of socialism that has lifted Portugal's fortunes over the past 3.5 years. In the Portuguese media, the term geringonça, meaning an odd contraption, has stuck. Peter Mandelson, the British Labour peer, has suggested the fourth way. António Costa, the Prime Minister who gained office by forging a surprising partnership between the moderate and hard left, simply calls it turning the page on austerity. So again, this is the propaganda of the Portuguese government for the past 4 years. They claim to end austerity when in fact they are applying the highest austerity ever. Taxes were never this high, cuts to the public services were never this high, public investment was never this low. We are hitting all kinds of records. Our debt has reached a record in, I think it was last year, a record that we have never seen, because this government pushes for policies where to control the deficit, to mask the deficit, really, they don't pay suppliers, for example, in the suppliers of hospital equipment, they don't pay them, so the debt increases, but the deficit doesn't move because they actually didn't make any expense. The suppliers just go bankrupt. And this is the policy of the left and the far left that's been applied here. And they claim turning the page on austerity, which the Financial Times now seems to want to push for as well. And if we read a little bit more, you will see, for example, one of the few successful center-left politicians in Europe. Again, this is not center-left. The socialists are not center-left. They are left, very leaning to the far left, as we've seen in these 4 years. Mr. Costa is on course for re-election this year, having presided over an economic turnaround. There was no economic turnaround. We are just witnessing the highest cuts ever. Things are not even working in this country because of the cuts that this government has been doing. Just to have the deficit numbers shown to Brussels, and they are happy about them, but the country is failing. The public services like health and transportation, public transportation, they barely work. They suffered such high cuts just so that this government could distribute benefits towards their clienteles, like the public servants and the pensioners, that these services barely work to a point where people just, they can't go to work, or they get to work much later than they should. This causes immense problems. And it was all caused by this government. But just so they can show these amazing deficit numbers, which are accomplished by means of very high, very harsh austerity, but they claim it's the end of austerity. It's preposterous, and it's complete fake news. And everyone that lives in this country knows this, at least anyone that isn't a fanatic for these parties, these lefts and far lefts parties. Everyone that isn't a fanatic knows this, but it seems that even the Financial Times, just like the New York Times, they love to push for the left agenda. They love to lie. They love to push fake news. So economic turnaround that has restored confidence to Portugal, a country that the European debt crisis brought to its knees. Unemployment has halved to 6.7%, and the budget deficit could be eliminated this year for the first time in over 40 years. So you see, they say that the budget deficit could be eliminated. It could be zero. But how does a newspaper called Financial Times, while claiming that Portugal has ended austerity, think that a deficit reaches zero? Because it's applying austerity. This is so simple. But it seems that these journalists, in quotes of course, don't even know the basics about economics in a newspaper called Financial Times. This is ridiculous. This is just propaganda. This is just fake news. Oh, the Financial Times also has a graph of something that no country wants, and that shows clearly how bad we are. But apparently this is great, and other countries need to follow this as well. We have the third highest debt in Europe. Amazing, right? And the only thing that has contributed to the lower deficit, because the costs are, the expenses are actually going higher than before, because again, this socialist and far left government is distributing benefits to the public servants and the pensioners. And they are also reducing the number of working hours. They are actually increasing the minimum wage for public servants in a value that is higher than everyone else in the country, which is another thing that is not constitutional, but because our president is a useful idiot, and he of course supports this regime, he does nothing. And so we have here the third highest debt in Portugal, and apparently this is amazing, and every other country needs to follow it. Well, all this article is completely false in financial and in economic data, except for the graphs. Those are real, but when you read the text, it almost seems like the graphs should be ignored because the text claims it. Austerity has ended, but the deficit is almost zero. How do you reach a deficit almost zero? Oh, it's magic. It's the socialist magic. No, it's not. It's the highest austerity that we have ever seen. I'm very frustrated with the fact that, as I mentioned in the New York Times video, I'm very frustrated by the fact that even foreign media is pushing for the lies of this government, of the Portuguese government. They are not doing anything. In fact, one of the things that have benefited us, well, everyone in Europe, but especially us with very high debts, are the costs with the interests of the debt. The Central European Bank has pushed for very low interest rates. Most of them are in the negative. And that's what allowed us to decrease the costs with the interests. And that's why they have been, praised for the amazing deficit values that this year supposedly will be nearly zero. So this government has done absolutely nothing. And even some of the graphs that the Financial Times itself publishes show that. But the text still pushes for the narrative that this government has done something extraordinary that no one has done. No, they haven't done anything. Absolutely anything. The only thing that they have kept is precisely austerity, the highest ever. We have more taxes, we have higher cuts, we have the lowest public investment, we have the highest debt. So what have they done? They have done nothing except try to sell their snake oil, because that's what socialists and the far left does. They do nothing more than sell snake oil. Anyway, that's about it. So I hope you like this, and I'll see you next time.